everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name's Ella. I'm an autistic non-binary content creator and today I'm going to be talking about my process of getting PIP. Apologies if you can hear my cat in the background. She's been a right little dickhead lately. So PIP is Personal Independence Payment, and it is essentially a benefit that you can get from the government here in the UK if you are disabled. It's essentially a payment that is there to buffer the fact that living as a disabled person can cost upwards of £1,000 more a month, and it's there to help with the extra costs of living as a disabled person. And I applied on the basis of being autistic, having mental health problems such as depression, anxiety and PTSD, as well as other undiagnosed things that I know that I have, like ADHD. I applied way back in August last year and I only got confirmation of my PIP at the end of April, beginning of May this year. So in total it took 8 to 9 months for me to go through the whole process and actually be awarded it. I had 2 appeals and a tribunal within that time in order to get it, and I'm going to talk about the process of that, things like tips and also some questions that I asked you guys if you had. I'm going to structure the video between, you know, the process of me going through it, the tips that I have, and all of the little things in between. Now, I want to state here that this was not an easy thing for me to get. PIP is actually a really grueling, biased, inaccessible process, and it's built that way because the government don't want to give disabled people this money, so they make it as inaccessible as possible, to the point where you give up applying, you don't apply in the first place because of how inaccessible it is. Had I not been awarded it when I had, I wouldn't have appealed again. I wouldn't have reapplied. I would have just left it because it was a really draining process, and I want to state that from the beginning because I'm going to be very matter of fact about the things that I did, dropping in some things that happened along the way, but I don't want you to think that this was an easy ride, because it wasn't. Okay, so starting up with applying first. So I believe you can apply through post, but I just rang up, which I know isn't the best thing for most people, but I will say that the initial phone that you do to get the assessment, like papers and documents, isn't intense at all. You're essentially phoning a call center at that point, and they're just asking you some very basic questions like what you're applying for, if you've left the country, if you're a UK resident, things like that. And then they send you a link via email, which takes you to the application process, and you have to fill it out within 7 days of receiving that link, or you do just have to reapply again through the phone or via post. I have like all of my forms here, which I'm not going to read out, but I'm going to use them to help me tell you what the structure was like. You can apply for PIP on the basis of multiple conditions. So when you're applying for it, you essentially get something like, it says, what's your name, your national insurance number, date of birth, tell us about your health, and then it's things like what health condition or disability do you have, and then you put the type, like the name of it, and then it asks the approximate start date, and then then there's a whole thing where you can put in, like it says, about this condition or disability and how it affects you. So I essentially wrote like thousands. I think you can get up to 5,000 words per little section of each question. And I just typed away and typed away. You can get somebody to do it for you. You can even contact Citizens Advice to get help about it. Personally, I have an issue with allowing people into like doing things for me. I get really stressed. I don't like people touching my things. I don't like people involved in the process of things. That's for me. So I did it myself. And then in that you can then, it then says, do you have another condition or disability that you'd like to tell us about? Then if you have other things, you can say yes, and then you go through the same process again of talking about it and how it affects you. Then it leads you on to things like questions around specific day-to-day things. So tell us about the difficulties you have with preparing food and how you manage them. Tell us about any therapies that you take or anything that you need to do with another person. Tell us about the difficulties you have with eating, drinking and how you manage them. Tell us about your condition and how it affects you managing your treatments. Tell us about the difficulties you have monitoring the changes in your health condition or disability, taking medication, how you manage that. Does this condition affect you using the toilet or managing incontinence? Tell us about the difficulties you have with going to the toilet and how you manage them. Does this condition affect dressing and undressing? Does your condition affect talking, listening and understanding? Tell us about the difficulties that you have with that. Does your condition affect your ability to read? Tell us about the difficulties in that. Does your condition affect you mixing with other people, managing money? Do you have mobility issues? Affect you getting around? And then there's like a thing that you can put additional information on. I'm not going to go into the details of the things that I said I struggle with. I feel like that's a very personal thing to me. There's lots of things that I go into detail on here that I don't talk about online, especially with the things like my mental health conditions, like PTSD. They're not something that I want to talk about. Those are very personal subjects. If you are wanting advice on that, I would recommend going to Citizens Advice or talking to somebody in your life if you have one, around, you know, their perspective of the things that you struggle with and things like that. I'd love to help, but it's an intimate personal thing that I'd rather keep to myself and put that boundary up. And all of those sections, you can then talk about that in relation to each condition that you have. Then at the end of the process, you are given the chance to upload some documents around sort of supporting evidence that will support your claim. That is things like GP notes, notes from your therapist. I uploaded my autism diagnosis papers because usually when you get diagnosed, I'm not really sure because I went through a private clinic via the NHS, you get sent like a document of all of the things that the assessor has noticed in you, the things that you struggle with, the way that your condition affects you, things like that. So I uploaded that. I uploaded some therapy notes, and then I requested some notes from my GP. Now, that is where I encountered a problem, and it stressed me out. When I first sent my PIP off, they contacted me and said that, hey, we're having some issues getting your GP notes. So I contacted my GP, and I'm still registered at my hometown GP in Chesley Street, which is where I'm from, but I live in Newcastle. I have not registered for a GP in Newcastle in the 5 years that I live here because I have been on wait lists for autism and ADHD. When I got my autism diagnosis, I was straight on the wait list for ADHD. And if you move GPs while you're on the wait list for something to a different catchment from like Durham to Newcastle, you have to re-register, or you get put right at the bottom of the wait list for those things that you're waiting for. So I have not re-registered here because I've been waiting for a diagnosis of things, and because I'd already been waiting for a year, like of course I'm not gonna move GPs and go right to the bottom of a new catchment's wait list. Like, I'm not going to do that. My GP said that he did not want to provide me with any kind of supporting evidence for PIP because I wasn't living in the catchment of the GP surgery. They cannot do that, okay? They cannot withhold your information, your medical information from you because they think that you live in it, because you live in a different catchment, and they don't want to provide that for you. Is it annoying for a GP to have to provide information for someone who is living in a different catchment? Yeah, but it's my information. There are very valid reasons why I haven't moved GPs. It's another reason why this kind of system is completely inaccessible to disabled people. Like, if you're waiting for an autism diagnosis but you're a student or you move about a lot, it's fucking difficult if you're going through the NHS. It's another reason why it's completely inaccessible. And I was made out to be the problem there, and not the fact that this system is just completely fucked. So I very nearly didn't get my GP notes from my GP. I did almost just access all of my records and just have them sent to me, because you can do that. You can request your GP notes anytime, but because this was supporting evidence for my GP, for PIP itself, my GP was like, no, I'm not doing that. And I had to have multiple phone calls with them and get very angry about how, you know, you're making this really difficult. I mean, the people on the phone at PIP nearly threw out my case. They nearly stopped the whole process because they couldn't get my GP evidence. They told me that over the phone, and I was just like, how is this my fault? And I would have to reapply again, and this was like 3 months in at this point. It was a mess. So after that process, I basically got told that my PIP had been rejected. Then you can appeal. So I appealed, and that appeal process you can either do on the computer or you can call them up, and it is basically you disagreeing with why they have said you're not entitled to PIP. So they send you a letter, which I will find. They basically send you a letter where they go through everything that you have said and tell you why that means you're not eligible. So things like, they misgender me in this, so let's just ignore that. Reports she has had previous input from talking changes for therapy. This was around last year. Has no input since. No community mental health team, no sectioning, no crisis team in over a year, no psychiatrist, no care plans. So because you're not receiving help for the things that you say you have, they're like, why would you need PIP? And then for something else, no input since, no referral, no care plans. They even said something like takes no medication for autism. There is literally no medication that you can get for autism. You cannot get medicated for it. It's not something that's medicated. Like, so I was like, how can you say that I'm not entitled to PIP because I'm not medicated for the thing that I have when there is literally no medication for it? And when I first applied, I wasn't going to therapy, and they were like, you don't go to therapy, so you clearly don't need help. I now go to therapy, even though it shouldn't really matter, because you applying for PIP, it's on the basis of this is how my condition affects my everyday life. Because they see you not getting medical treatment for it, that's their way of being like, it clearly doesn't affect you enough. So your appeal is basically saying, hey, you said that I shouldn't be awarded it on the basis of this, but here's why that's wrong. And I did the first appeal over the phone, where she was just like, what are you disagreeing with in this section, in this section, in this section? And then she typed it up and sent it away. Then you get another letter through the post, and this was again saying that I was not awarded PIP. And PIP is a point system, so all of those sections that I've talked through, you get awarded points based on that, and you need 12 in order to get PIP. When I got it back, I had managed to get 6 points up from 0, and it was specifically on the communications and like how I interact with people section, which was obviously not enough to get awarded PIP because it was only 6 points. Again, I appealed that, and this time I did my appeal online, where it brings up again all of the sections that they have said you're not entitled to PIP. And then I was like, am I in focus? Yeah. I was like, this is why I disagree, this is how it affects me, this is why it's not right. Sent that away. That got denied again, and then after that appeal, it gets sent to a tribunal, which is basically a court system, which you don't have to do in person. I didn't do mine in person, I did mine over the phone. It was like an online conference call, where you join. There is a judge, and then a mobility expert and a daily living expert. Before your tribunal, they will send you a whole ass, like, massive chunky paper of every single correspondence that you have had during your PIP process. So your application, the appeal, your appeal of that again, and it's everything, all of the documents that you've sent them, every like interaction that you've had with them, so that you have it and it's numbered, so that when you're in the tribunal, they'll go, oh hey, you said on page 43 you said this, tell me about that. The tribunal, okay, let's get into that, because that was rough. I did not enjoy that at all. Essentially how I feel it went, it was them trying to trip me up. So instead of them trying to get a better understanding of what I struggle with, it was like, oh, here you said that you struggle to communicate with people, but on page 43 you said that you go to the shops with your neighbour. How does that work? How do you struggle with communication but you also have a friend? Things like, oh, it says that you can struggle to leave the house sometimes, but you have a 16-hour part-time job. That doesn't add up. There wasn't like, tell us about how that works for you or how that affects your life and what you struggle with. It was like, we're trying to figure out whether you're lying or not, and it just felt very invalidating. The whole process is exhausting, like really exhausting. And the tribunal lasted, I would say, about an hour and a half. The judge sort of just sits there and listens while these two people discuss your mobility and your daily living. And then he will like, I had a male judge, but I guess I don't have any. They will like jump in and say things like, I'm just a bit confused about this part, could you clarify this? And then after that tribunal, they then discuss whether they think you should be awarded or not, and they don't tell you there and then. You'll get a letter, and I got the letter within 3 working days, I believe, to say that I had been awarded PIP. And you can either get a daily living payment or a mobility payment, and there are 2 tiers of each. So there's a lower and a higher rate. I get both the lower rate of daily living and mobility, which I was quite shocked at, to be honest. But what I have realised from doing PIP is that even though it's exhausting and even though you have to relay everything that you struggle with, it's actually made me realise how I diminish what I struggle with, because PIP is hard to get, yet they noticed in me the mobility issues that I have in terms of, like, not physically, but getting out of the house, struggling with moving about the house and doing things. They noticed that in me even when I didn't, and that's not me praising the system at all, because it's still hard to get, but it has made me realise the way that I diminish my own struggles. So I got the daily living and mobility allowance on the lower rate, and you get a back payment. So I applied in August. I was then awarded it on the date that I mentioned before, and therefore I got a back payment from when I first applied of that rate. So you end up with a big lump sum of all of the money that you were entitled to from first applying. And the way that payments work is that you get paid every 4 weeks. So it's not going to be the same date every month. It's a 4-week payment. So it's going to end up on a different day every month, but it's every 4 weeks. It is also a payment that you get that is not means tested. So you can earn however much money you do and it's not going to affect your PIP. It's not taxable, so it's not in addition to what you earn. It's a tax-free payment. The only thing I will say is that it doesn't matter what you earn, but if you have a full-time job, they're going to judge you on that. Like, if you can get out and leave the house and work 35 plus hours a week, they judge you on that. Like me having a 16-hour part-time job, they judge me on that as if it's like, oh, but you're clearly capable. So it's not means tested, however they will judge you based on whether you have a full-time job or not. Okay, so your questions. Can you get PIP for being self-diagnosed / on a waiting list? Yes. So there are ways and means of getting PIP if you don't have an official diagnosis yet. However, it is trickier. So I applied, like I had down there undiagnosed ADHD, that I'm in the process of getting diagnosed with it, because it's not necessarily about providing a diagnosis paper, it's about how that condition affects your life. So if you can highlight to them, hey, I don't have a diagnosis for this yet because the system is like, it's going to take a really long time for me to get it, but here's how it affects my life, and you can get a GP to back that up, you can. Do I think that it's harder because they're going to judge you on the fact that you don't have a diagnosis yet? Yes, but it doesn't mean that you can't get it, if that makes sense, because it is just a really long-winded, sort of like grueling process that they judge you on at every step, and not having a diagnosis can make that really hard, because to them that's like, it's no proof and you could be lying even though you're not. Do you know what I mean? Why does it take so bloody long? Part of me feels like they do it on purpose, because like I said, they're trying to sway disabled people off from doing it, but it's also I think, don't quote me on this, it's handled by your local authority. So me and my dad applied for it at the same time, but he is still waiting on a tribunal date. And he was told over the phone that it can take up to 26 weeks to get a tribunal date in his area, which is months. It's literally months. It's like half a fucking year. I think it's handled by your local authority. I think there's a massive waiting list and a backlog for it. But part of me feels like they kind of do it on purpose sometimes, in a mixture, I think. Do you know what the guidelines for autistics are to get PIP? I'm worried I won't meet them. So like I said, PIP is awarded on the basis of how your condition affects your life. It's not like they're going to look at you and go, oh, you're only autistic, you need other things to get this. It's how does your autism affect your life? If you can sit there and sort of like explain your needs and how it impacts your life, that's what you get it on. It's not about like how many boxes you tick in terms of all of these conditions. How did you balance it being worth it to go through the process against the energy and the emotional drain required to go through it, especially when it's so hard and stressful? Yeah, like I said, had I not been awarded it after this tribunal, I would have given up. Like I literally would have given up, because it was awful. Like, you just feel judged at every turn, literally every step of the way. It's sort of like, you're lying, we're gonna figure out that you're lying. And even now that I've been awarded it, I'm like, oh my god, like they're gonna come after me and they're gonna pretend that I'm like they're gonna say that I'm lying and I've made it all up, even though I know I haven't. But because, like, especially being autistic and struggling with imposter syndrome, like, it is really difficult to feel like it's, you know, something that I'm entitled to, even though I am a disabled person, I'm therefore entitled to it. Like, they gaslight you into thinking that you're making it all up and you're not entitled to it, and people are worse off than you, why should you have it, kind of thing. But they do that on purpose, to like stop disabled people from applying so that you don't take money from the government. Do you need to be living alone to gain access to it? No. It's like, I live alone, you can live with your parents, you can live with a partner. That's not, it is purely based off how your condition affects your everyday life. If anything, I think the fact that I live alone made them question me even more, because it's like, how can your condition affect your life but you live alone and somehow manage to live alone? They will talk about your living situation, whether somebody lives with you and they help you, things like that. It's not, you don't have to tick a box of living in a specific way. It's how your condition affects your life living in that way, if that makes sense. The biggest question that I get is, what am I going to use the money for? So for me, PIP wasn't just about getting the extra money to buffer the fact that it costs more to live as a disabled person. It's also about the things that it allows you to access. I'll get onto what I'll spend the money for later, but it was also about being able to get a disabled rail card. You can't get that unless you get a disability benefit from the government. Being able to access certain access tickets for things such as trains, concerts, venues, literally everything. You're able to access so many different things because you're awarded PIP from the government, and that's what I was so excited about. Like, I am excited to get a disabled rail card so that I can get cheaper tickets for people that come with me. It means that you can get disabled access to other things. You can apply to get a radar key, I think, which are like keys that allow you to access accessible toilets that are like locked to the general public. But what I want the money for, I don't want to go into too much detail about this because I feel like, again, it's just something that's like personal to me, but living as an autistic person costs more. I travel a lot for work and I really struggle to go in standard class, and I don't mean that in a pretentious way. I mean that in a first class is more accessible to me because it's quieter. It is, you get more room, it's not as busy, people don't talk to you as much, or there's just not as much noise. It is safer for me as an autistic person to be there, especially because I find traveling so hard, but it is part of my job. So I feel as though I feel like that is a way of highlighting the way that it's going to help me with my access requirements, if that makes sense. Therapy, I now go to private therapy, which I couldn't necessarily afford beforehand, but because I was going through the PIP process and I was hoping I was going to award it, I started it in January. It's now going to help me pay for that. I tried to go through like the free funded therapies that you can get and they just didn't work for me. Now I go see a private therapist every 2 weeks. It's going to help with that. I'm currently going through a private ADHD diagnosis because I've been on the wait list for a year on the NHS and they told me it could take up to another 4 to 5 years. I'm not waiting that long. I'm not waiting that long. So I'm currently going through a private diagnosis of that, which obviously costs. So that's going to help with that. I am looking at moving, and I really struggle with at-home issues. Like, when my sensory issues invade my home, it really stresses me out. So I am going to be saving up my PIP in order to feel like I can find a nicer place to live when I move, which is obviously going to be more expensive, but again, it's going to help me with my access needs, which is what I'm going to be using that for. And in general, PIP, like I said, is there to buffer the fact that it costs more to live as a disabled person. So that is there to help me if I ever need things like a new pair of headphones to help with my sensory issues, or just feeling more comfortable in being able to pay for things and access things that I should be able to access. And what are my top tips for applying? Honestly, I'm really not an expert on this. I don't want to sit here and say that because I've been through the system I know what I'm talking about, because I've just applied on the basis of who I am. I don't have physical access needs. I don't have a physical disability, so I can't talk on that part. I can't talk about applying on the basis of other conditions, other disabilities. I don't know. Top tip that I got was talk about your worst day. But not in a way as if it's like that's how you are all the time, but use that as a basis of understanding what you clearly struggle with. Because I've heard people talk about saying that this is my worst day and this is how I struggle every day. You can get done for benefit fraud on that, because you're essentially sort of twisting the truth, and if they find out about that, you can get done for benefit fraud. But it's more about thinking about your worst day and using that to understand what you clearly struggle with and relaying that to them. I would say have patience, which I know is really hard. Like, it took 8 to 9 months for me, and that's actually kind of quick for the PIP process, compared to what my dad's going through, which is probably going to take him over a year of getting it. Keep an eye out for letters. It is so easy to forget that one has come through, you've missed one, you haven't had a letter yet. If you feel like it's been too long before you've heard, call them, because I've heard too many people say that their letter got lost in the post, and when they've called up, they've missed the deadline for appeal, and therefore you have to either have your case chucked out and reapply from the beginning, or they can contest the fact that your appeal has been thrown out because you've lost a letter or something like that. But that just adds extra time onto, you know, managing to get the money. Go to Citizens Advice if you can. Like I said, I really struggle with allowing other people to do things for me, so I didn't. It really stresses me out, and I don't like people taking over things. But if you feel like you need support, there are things like Citizens Advice, and I do believe that there are local charities that work in local areas that will help you, so maybe look into that. Try and get as much evidence as you can, even if you feel like it's meaningless. Old therapy notes, GP notes, things like that. I feel like you can also get, when you're appealing, somebody else can do it for you, and they can be like your elected person to talk about it. I think that you can get people in your life, like carers or parents or people that look after you, to sort of write a testimonial, I guess, about what you struggle with and what they see that you struggle with. Yeah, getting as much evidence as you can and being persistent. There are so many times where I just nearly gave up because the process is so grueling, but it really is worth it in the end, because I feel so much more comfortable now in accessing things that help me with my daily living, such as therapy, and feeling more comfortable in finding somewhere to live that's going to be better for me and mentally better for me. Really is worth it in the end. It's just obviously a really draining process. If you have any further questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see if I can answer them to the best of my ability. I hope that this video has been helpful. I hope that it's made sense. I hope that that helps you in, if you're going through the PIP process right now, or you're thinking about applying. You apply through the government website in the UK, and it'll tell you if you're like living in Wales or in Scotland or Ireland, it'll like send you to the right place. I wish you the best if you're applying for it. I wish you the best, and I hope that you get what you deserve. Thank you for watching this video. I hope to see you in the next one. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!